I found the suitcase before I found the note. It was sitting by the front door of our townhouse in Queen Village. Black leather scuffed on the edges. Jason never left it there, not even when he had early flights. He was meticulous down to the way he rolled his socks. I stood in the hallway a long time before touching it. My hands were cold. It was October in Philadelphia, and the draft through the front windows hadn't been fixed yet. We were supposed to get to it after his work trip, except there wouldn't be one this time. The note wasn't even handwritten. It was printed laser ink, 2 lines center aligned. I've left. Don't call. Please don't make this harder than it already is. That was all. No signature, just my name typed at the bottom like a mailing label. Mara. No love, no I'm sorry, just my name like I was a tenant he was evicting. I sat on the couch, shoes still on, staring at the corner of the rug. There was a thread unraveling. I'd meant to fix that last weekend. I didn't cry. That part came later and not in the way I expected. I reached for my phone and dialed his mother's landline. We weren't close, but she always knew where he was. Corinne was the type of woman who hosted dinner parties with name cards, even when it was just family. The line rang twice, then a voice answered, but it wasn't hers. Hello? Young, breathless, female. I froze. I'm looking for Corinne Trent. A pause, then a giggle, half muffled. Oh no, she's not here right now? Can I take a message? Something in my chest tightened. Who is this? Another pause. I'm sorry, who's calling? I hung up. It was instinctual, like touching something hot. My hands were shaking now, not from the draft. I had been married to Jason for 6 years. We met at Temple University. He was in finance. I was studying nonprofit management. He had this way of making everything feel like a future. He said we more than I. We would travel, we would build something. Now I was alone with a suitcase and a silent phone. I tried calling Renee, Next's sister. No answer. Then I called Jamie. Jamie and I met at a city grant writing workshop 3 years ago. She once told me the people who ghost are often the ones who were never there to begin with. I hadn't understood what she meant. Until now. She showed up at my place with soup and tea and didn't ask questions. Just let me sit. She didn't even comment when I put my shoes on again at midnight and walked around the block, twice. 3 days passed before I touched the suitcase. Inside shirt still folded from our last weekend trip. A cologne I gave him that Christmas. No passport, no toothbrush. It wasn't a travel bag, it was a message. Like he wanted me to see what he left behind. On the 4th day, Corinne called. Mara, I assume you've spoken to him. Her voice was brittle like ice cracking. I didn't know what to say. Then she added, you should know, this wasn't sudden. I asked, who was the girl that answered your phone? She was quiet. Then too calm, that's Renee's friend. She's been staying over. Renee's friend. I didn't press, I just listened. And then I hung up, again. Grief doesn't always howl. Sometimes it drips like a faucet you forget to shut off. That week I canceled the lease, left the couch, the dining set, even the kettle. I took the rug, I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted to fix that thread someday. Jamie let me crash in her guest room. Her cat hated me. The radiator hissed all night, but it was the first place I breathed. I didn't talk about Jason. Not to Jamie, not to my therapist, not even to myself, but I started sketching again. Pencil lines on scraps of paper, a tree, a spine, a woman with no face. And slowly I let the silence stretch. I thought of that voice on the phone. I never heard her name, but somehow I knew she was the one who replaced me before I even had a chance to be missed. And I wasn't ready to be anyone again. Not yet. I should have called first. That thought hit me the second I stepped into Jason's building, the sun still warm on my shoulders, tickets to the symphony curled in my hand. I'd stopped by a bakery on Hawthorne for his favorite lemon bars. They were still warm, the paper bag soft with butter. Everything in me buzzed with the ease of love, the comfort of knowing, or thinking I knew. The first thing I noticed when I opened his apartment door, he always left it unlocked when I was expected, was the scent. Soft, powdery, familiar. Vanilla. I froze in the entryway. Jason didn't wear vanilla anything, and I hadn't worn that scent since I was a teenager. But Corinne did. She always had. Every birthday, every holiday, I'm just stopping by, she carried it like a second skin. I stepped forward. There was a pale blouse slung over the back of the chair. It wasn't mine. I picked it up without thinking, silk pale coral, the kind Corinne wore to brunch. Still warm from someone's body. A thin gold bracelet lay on the counter, one of those with tiny heart charms. I gave her that on her 22nd birthday. Laughter drifted from the back room, Jason's voice, low, intimate, and hers higher, that breathy tilt she used when she wanted to be adored. I didn't drop the lemon bars, I didn't call out. I set the bag on the table and walked down the hall like I was moving through someone else's life. The bedroom door was cracked just enough. Corinne sat cross-legged on Jason's bed, hair damp like she'd just stepped from the shower. Jason's arm lay across the sheets beside her. They weren't touching, but they might as well have been. I didn't speak, just stood there. Jason looked up first. His eyes widened, then softened too slow, like he was calculating. Mara. I held up the tickets. They fluttered slightly in the air, ridiculous and blue. Corinne turned. Her mouth opened, but she didn't smile, just sighed. This was going to come out eventually, she said. No apology, no guilt, just that. Like she'd scheduled this betrayal in a planner, and today was the reveal. Jason stood, but I backed away. My feet moved before my heart caught up. I walked out the same way I'd come, but it felt like I was leaving through something scorched. I didn't cry, not in the hallway, not in the car, not even when I found the drawing I'd done of Jason, the one I'd framed on his wall, still hanging crooked. I took it down, folded it gently, not ripped, not ruined, just over. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch in the dark, staring at a glass of untouched water. Jamie called around midnight. I didn't answer the first 2 times. The third I did. You okay? She asked. No, I said, but I'm leaving. Leaving? I need more than a new pillow. I need a new sky. She offered her couch. I told her thank you. I needed space, not comfort. By morning, I was at my mother's. The house looked smaller somehow, older. I stepped inside and found Renee at the kitchen table, peeling an orange with surgical precision. She didn't look surprised. I suppose she told you, she said. She didn't need to, I said. I saw it. Renee didn't flinch. This is better for everyone. I stared at her. She didn't even pretend to ask if I was okay. Her hands kept peeling slow and unbothered. On her counter, next to the napkin holder, I left a note. Just 3 words. Watch me thrive. I drove away with the windows down, summer air curling around me like something I'd finally earned. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wasn't staying. I didn't remember the exact turnoff, but my hands did. They guided me along roads I hadn't driven in years, down 2-lane highways, softened by dust and memory. It was late August, the kind of heat that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. I rolled the windows down and let the silence fold around me like a shawl. The lake house wasn't mine. Technically, it had never been anyone's. My Aunt Melody used to say it belonged to the trees and the water, and we were just visitors passing through. She hadn't been back since she broke her hip in 2012 and moved to Arizona. But the key was still under the 3rd brick by the porch. Still rusted, still home. Inside it smelled like cedar and forgotten books. I didn't turn on any lights, just walked straight to the back, opened the screen door, and stepped onto the dock. The water was still. That night, I slept on the old couch with a crocheted blanket wrapped around my shoulders, the lake whispering through the open window. I didn't check my phone. I didn't dream. For the first time in weeks, the quiet didn't hurt. In the morning, I made tea with a cracked kettle and walked barefoot on the wood floor, feeling each groove and splinter like a reminder I was still here. alive, unfolding. By the second day, I found an old sketchbook in the storage bench beneath the window. The pages were warped but clean. I sat on the steps and began to draw not people, not Jason, not Corinne, just shapes, movements, the way light made its own language on the water. I didn't speak to anyone, not even Jamie, though she texted twice a day. Always something simple. You breathing, need snacks or sarcasm. I didn't reply, but I read them. It wasn't until the 5th day that I drove into town. I needed soap bread and something that didn't taste like canned beans. The general store hadn't changed, same handwritten signs, same old man behind the counter with a face like dried leather. Passing through, he asked. I smiled, something like that. He rang up my items without another word. But when I turned to leave, he said, "Stillness is good, but it's not the same as peace." Back at the lake house, I unpacked slowly. I set the soap by the sink, the bread on the counter. I moved like someone putting herself back together from the outside in. That evening, I sat by the dock with my tea and the old sketchbook. A bird called in the trees behind me. The sun dipped behind the hills. And for the first time since I left Portland, I said something out loud. I missed the version of me who didn't have to survive people. It sounded strange in the open air, but the lake didn't flinch. It just kept holding the sky. That night, I drew until my hands ached. I sketched the outline of a woman in a rocking chair. Strong hands, bare feet, hair pulled back. She looked nothing like Corinne, and nothing like the girl I used to be. She looked like someone who had walked through fire and stayed soft. In the final light, I wrote something at the bottom of the page. Just 2 words. Start here. I didn't mean to open the box. I'd tucked it under the bed on my first night at the cabin, thinking I'd deal with it later, much later, maybe never. But it rained that morning, and sometimes rain is just quiet enough to let the past speak. The box was white, shoebox-sized, covered in a fading sticker from a boutique we'd once loved, Corinne and I. Back when we still shopped together, laughed over bracelets, argued over lip gloss colors. I lifted the lid. Inside, a concert ticket stub. A pair of earrings, silver hoops, slightly bent. My old sketch of Corinne on the pier. Her eyes were softer in graphite than they ever were in real life. Beneath it all, folded twice, was a note in her handwriting. Don't ever forget I loved you first. It was dated 2 years ago. I stared at that sentence longer than I should have. My chest didn't burn, my hands didn't shake, but something cracked. There are some things your body remembers before your mind does, like how my boots thudded against the floor as I walked to the lake that afternoon, like the way the wind sounded different when you're holding something you can't say out loud. At the shoreline, I let the note fall into the water. It floated for a moment. Then, like everything Corinne ever gave me, it sank. Later that evening, I sat on the cabin steps with a blanket around my shoulders and the sketchbook in my lap. Not drawing, just holding it. Jamie called, voice soft. You okay? I'm quiet, I said. Do you want me to come up? No, but I like knowing you asked. She didn't press. She never did. That night, I made a list in my journal. The things she took. My first boyfriend in 9th grade. My birthday dress senior year, my dog's ashes, Jason. And then I flipped the page. The things she can't have. This silence, this lake, this version of me. I don't know if healing is a place you arrive at or a story you rewrite by living, but that night under a sky full of nothing and everything, I began again. And in the stillness, I heard my own voice for the first time in a long while. It took me 2 hours to cook. Roasted carrots with thyme. A chicken I'd brined since morning, mashed potatoes the way Jamie taught me garlic skin. On just enough cream. I set the table like I used to, 2 places, candles low. It wasn't a holiday, but something in me wanted to mark the night. By 6:30, the food was warm, the wine was breathing, and I was sitting on the edge of the porch steps, listening for footsteps I knew wouldn't come. I hadn't invited anyone. I guess grief makes you do strange things. It mimics anticipation. It tells you to set places for people who've long since eaten elsewhere. The food steamed in silence. The lake held its breath. I hadn't meant to open the drawer. It was the old maple one in Mom's kitchen, the one that always stuck a little when you pulled it out too fast. I was reaching for scissors to cut twine off a bundle of books when something caught my eye. A yellow envelope, no name on the front, just slightly crumpled at the corner like it had been handled too many times. I almost put it back. But I didn't. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, the kind Corinne used to hoard from the boutique downtown when we were teenagers. Handwriting I knew better than my own name. A letter. Dear Mom, it began. I don't know how to say this out loud, so I'm writing it instead. My fingers tightened. She went on, about how for as long as she could remember, it felt like I was the one who belonged in every room. That when she brought home good grades, Mom smiled, but when I brought home a C in a painting, Mom framed it. That no matter how many times she tried, she always felt one step behind me. And you say we're both special, she wrote, but I know what kind of special wins your heart. The next line was smudged. Ink bled like maybe she'd cried. Or maybe just pressed too hard. Sometimes I just want to be chosen first, even if it's messy, even if it hurts someone. I stared at that line for a long time. Corinne had never sent the letter. She'd folded it back up, tucked it away, and stayed. And that choice, staying in the bitterness and the hunger to be seen, had curdled into something else entirely. I didn't hate her, but I no longer recognized her. And maybe she hadn't recognized herself either. I slipped the letter back into the envelope, pushed it deep into the drawer again like a memory I couldn't quite erase but didn't need to carry. Some truths don't need to be thrown in anyone's face. They just need to be set down. When I closed the drawer, it didn't stick this time. It slid shut, quiet and clean. A deer passed by the edge of the trees, unhurried. I watched her walk with more grace than I ever felt in my own kitchen. When the wind shifted, I stood up, went back inside, and sat at the table alone. I served myself, ate slowly, one bite then another. The mashed potatoes were perfect. No one asked how my day was. No one interrupted my thoughts. For once, that wasn't loneliness. That was peace. Halfway through the meal, I glanced at the second plate, and I pictured Corinne sitting there. Not the real Corinne, the one from the hallway. Her lipstick smudged her voice hard with justification. But the Corinne I remembered from when we were 15, wearing her cheer sweater, eating ice cream out of the tub while talking about boys. She always loved taking, I said aloud like she was really there. But you can't take hunger from someone who knows how to feed herself. I laughed softly. It startled me. After dinner, I cleared the plates, wrapped the leftovers, and blew out the candles. Then I took the second plate, still untouched, and walked it out to the dock. I stood there for a long while holding it, and then I let it go. The porcelain shattered when it hit the water, a sound like a throat unclenching. I didn't flinch. Later that night, Jamie texted, just one line. Still proud of you. I didn't reply, but I saved the message, and I whispered back, so am I. Sometimes the deepest conversations are the ones we have with empty chairs, and sometimes the dinner table no one sits at says more than any toast ever could. The bridge was still there, faded wood, rusted rails. It hadn't changed since the last time I saw it when Jason brought me there for our 1-year anniversary. Back then, it had felt like a beginning. Now it looked like something I had outgrown. I stood at the start of the bridge with my sketchbook pressed to my chest. My boots were dusty from the trail, and the air held that early October crispness, bright and a little sad like a farewell hug. Jamie was waiting at the other end by her car. She waved. I didn't wave back. Not yet. The walk across felt longer than I remembered. Each board creaked like an old friend trying to speak. I thought about how much of my life had been spent trying to cross into other people's stories. Jason's, Corinne's, even Renee's in her quiet, tidy version of what daughters should be. No one had ever asked me to write my own chapter. So I paused halfway, opened the sketchbook, and tore out the first page. It was a portrait Jason's, the one I used to tape above my desk. His jawline was too kind. His eyes looked like they'd seen me. They never had. I let the page fall. Wind caught it for a moment before it dropped into the stream below. Then I turned to the last page, blank. That's what I carried with me the rest of the way. Jamie opened the trunk without a word. My duffel went in. She handed me a coffee black, too hot, just the way I liked it. I booked the Airbnb in Portland, she said. I nodded. It's not forever, she added. I don't need forever, I just need somewhere new to begin. We drove in silence for a few miles, highway unfolding like ribbon. The sky over the trees was a soft kind of golden, like it hadn't decided what mood to wear yet. I looked out the window and whispered more to myself than to Jamie. I'm not angry anymore. The envelope was pale blue. Tucked in the spine of the old sketchbook Mara had carried like armor for months. Jamie didn't notice it at first. Only when she bent the spine too far did it flutter out like a loose leaf in autumn. There was no name on the outside. Just one word written in faint pencil. If. Jamie turned it over once, twice. Then without another glance at Mara, she opened it. She read slowly, deliberately. I once believed forgiveness had to be spoken to count. That healing had to be mutual. That redemption had a shape, and it looked like her hand holding mine at the edge of some perfect lake. A pause. Jamie blinked, swallowed, continued. But that was a child's wish. And I am not a child anymore. So I write this for the woman I became in her absence. Mara looked down, her fists were curled. I don't forgive you because you asked. You didn't. I don't forgive you because you earned it. You haven't. I forgive you because the version of me who keeps carrying this weight is not the version I want to become. The words hit the floor like pebbles dropped into still water, one by one, echoing. I forgive you because silence deserves a clean ending, and some love stories are buried, not broken. Jamie's voice dropped to a whisper. I hope someday you understand how much it cost me not to hate you. The fire popped. No one moved. Jamie folded the letter carefully like something sacred. She didn't hand it back. She held it in her lap, quiet, waiting for Mara to breathe again. Mara didn't speak, but when she finally looked up, her eyes weren't full of tears. They were clear. She didn't ask for anything to be different. She just nodded once. And in that silence, the past finally sat down and stayed. She didn't ask what I meant, but I saw her glance at me, a tiny smile. Somewhere behind us, Corinne would still be Corinne. Jason would still be a man who lied because it felt easier than telling the truth. And Renee would keep her house just as spotless, her voice just as calm, as if nothing had ever cracked beneath the surface. Let them. I wasn't trying to fix it anymore. At a gas station an hour later, I stepped into the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and for the first time in years, didn't wince. My reflection didn't ask for permission. It just stared back and said, "Let's go." And so I did. I walked away from that old bridge without anger, just a quietness I had finally earned. Sometimes the most healing moment isn't an apology. It's realizing you've stopped waiting for one. Life doesn't always teach us how to let go, especially when the pain comes from those we once loved. But maybe growing up means no longer living in that pain, choosing instead to walk forward with grace. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Sometimes a quiet voice on the other side of the radio is all it takes to feel less alone.